Hey guys, I'm RNG Gamer. I play all my games randomly. Welcome to my game room. Alright guys, this is my kind of catch-all shelf where the weird stuff that doesn't fit anywhere else goes. We have some PC stuff here, of course. This is where I keep my Dreamcast collection. We have a few heavy hitters, Canon, Spike, Illbleed. Was looking for this one for a long time and was able to pick it up. We also have a lot of really interesting import shoot-em-ups on the PC. Things you don't see very often, including what is probably the rarest item in my entire collection, Hellsinker. This was a homebrew done by a famous shoot-'em-up developer, and he did this as a passion project, and the only physical copies of this ever released were ones that he printed to give away at a convention. There may be 100 copies printed, there's no more. This game faded into obscurity until it came out on Steam recently, and it's become very popular again. The problem is now everybody wants a physical copy. You can't find it anywhere unless you have one of these. I was lucky enough to grab it for 10 bucks. Shipped from Japan. Down here we have a Game Gear collection and the Famicom stuff. It's hard to display this because there's no end labels, but still a really cool collection. One of my favorite Famicom games. That's Splatterhouse, Wanpaku Graffiti. It's like a cute, chibi, Nintendo-ish version of the Splatterhouse games. Everybody always asks about this. This is my Ikaruga arcade cabinet. This is a custom cabinet that I had, and it's just a MAME cabinet, but I had it done in a wrap with the art from Ikaruga. So if you've never played the game before, you have a ship that has a polarity system where you can switch from a dark polarity to a light polarity, which I had put on both sides. These posters, and I get a lot of requests about what these posters are. These were from Etsy, and they're done by a company called Crowsmack. Over here is my first console cabinet. We have a Vectrex. We have a lot of unique stuff in here. The Duo R, a consoleized Neo Geo, the twin Famicom, all the normal stuff you'd have. Down there's a consoleized Game Gear. Over here you can see the rest of it. We have some Atari stuff, a Pong console, a bunch of Sega Saturns, Watermelon, N64. This is my Philips CDI. And this was refurbished by the last tech to ever work on the CDI at Philips. So this thing has had all new caps installed on it. It should be bulletproof. It should last longer than any other CDI. They're notoriously flaky, so hopefully it lasts me a while. This is my Virtual Boy collection. I have a complete US Virtual Boy set. I have every game for it. I have all the heavy hitters, including Jack Bros, which is like the ultra super heavy hitter. If you're a big fan of Persona or the Shin Megami Tensei series, this game falls into that series. So if you're looking to complete it, you're a collector of that series, you have to have that game. It's a lot of fun, really hard to find. I picked it up on camera at the Southeast Game Exchange and I paid 700 bucks for it, which is really painful, but I've been looking for it for a long time. This is all of my Neo Geo stuff. I don't have an AES, I have the MVS. Like I said, I had an arcade cabinet that I had converted to a console, and these are the games for it. We have several good ones here, including all the King of Fighters games. This one's a shoot-'em-up that's really hard to find on the system, Blazing Star. Really interesting game. There's a lot going on here. This is an IKEA Kallax shelf. The biggest one that they make, the, 5x5 grid. This is just where I put the stuff that's too big to fit on any other shelf, which is typically big box PC games and collector's editions of things. This is a Sony PSX console. This was a console that played PlayStation 1 and PlayStation 2 games, and it was a DVR, and you could record gameplay footage on it. And these were really cool and highly sought after, but they suck. They all break, and the hard drive is actually encrypted. So once the hard drive fails on it, you can't replace it with any other hard drive. That hard drive is tied to this one console. People always ask about this. This is the Fire Emblem Fates Special Edition. When they announced Fire Emblem Fates was coming out, there was going to be two versions of the game, a light side version and a dark side version, each released as their own physical cart, but there was a third neutral side campaign that was only going to be DLC. unless you bought the collector's edition, where all 3 games are on one cart. And then some Action Max stuff. If you've never seen an Action Max before, it's a VHS themed console, and the games come on VHS cassettes. And you basically just watch the VHS and shoot at the screen, and it tallies up your total, kind of like Duck Hunt would. Vectrex set. If you've never seen the Vectrex, it's a 2nd generation console that was out around the same time as the Atari and the Intellivision. Really cool console, pretty easy to collect for with the exception of 3 games. 3D Crazy Coaster, 3D Mindstorm, and 3D Narrow Escape. Those were really uncommon because you have to have a peripheral for them to play it, which I happen to have. It's right here, I'm gonna pull it out. This is the Vectrex 3D Imager. And the way this works is, whoa, okay. Here's an old box. I'm talking early 80s, guys. This is the 3D Imager here.
Wow.
And you would slap this on your face.
Wow.
And inserted it in the front of this.
Looks like a welding mask.
It looks like a welding mask. It does. You're not joking. But you would pop these into the Imager, and each one is set to the game. So this is 3D Narrow Escape. This would spin and flash in conjunction with the strobing on the console to produce a 3D effect if you crossed your eyes. So people talk about like, oh man, I get a headache playing the Virtual Boy. If you ever want a freaking headache, try playing a Vectrex game in 3D. This is Dragon Force. This is my favorite Sega Saturn game. It's another tactical RPG, but really interesting, done by Working Designs. And they ported over a lot of really cool games from Japan that just, no one thought they would want in the United States, but they were onto something. But I wanted to emphasize and point out one game here that I think is the most interesting game, probably on the entire Sega Saturn collection. And it's this one here, and I can't remember the name of it, but this was a game that was designed to be played for visually impaired people. There are no graphics in this game. It's done completely using auditory cues, and it's an RPG. And I've always wanted to know what it's like to play this. Unfortunately, it's just Japanese dialogue the whole time. So I don't know what it's like. The back has no real pictures or anything. It just talks about the voice actors because there's no graphics in this game. So really interesting that they were doing accessibility things even back in the mid-90s. Here's my 3DO collection. I actually owned a 3DO. When I was a kid, I got it on clearance at a Babbage's for like $50. The games were just a couple of dollars. And I always thought it was really, really, really cool. The first time anyone really ever played a Need for Speed game. The first one came out on the 3DO first. And it was so realistic to me that I remember turning and like actually leaning because I felt like I was going to run off the road, even though I was a kid. Here's one of my favorite LucasArts games of all time, Loom. Nobody ever talks about it, but it was really cool. You get to use music as your spellcasting ability. So you type in the notes to a song and it will play different, or the notes will play out different spells. This idea was used later in Ocarina of Time. Here's the Switch. Now, I love the Switch. Everybody loves the Switch. The problem with the Switch is that the game cases don't film well. They look terrible. It's just red. But I'm going to show you a couple of really interesting ones that I'm sure you haven't seen before. I feel like this was the rarest game that I owned until they reprinted it 3 or 4 times, but it's Arcade Love plus Pingo. And these are all arcade games that were ported over to the Switch, and they are arcade games that are designed about building your skill as a gamer. So they're games designed to see how fast you can hit a button, or how fast you can double tap on the joystick, or how well you dodge in a shoot 'em up, or how fast you can dodge, and it ranks you based on how good you are. Now, talking about collector's editions, there's 2 here that people point out. There's the Xenoblade Chronicles 2 Special Edition, which is just like over-the-top art, pastel colors and stuff. Then you have the Fire Emblem 3 Houses Collector's Edition here, which is really understated. But I love the way that looks a lot more than this. Sometimes I wish that collector's editions looked more elegant and like shelf pieces rather than just being like explosions of color like a Lisa Frank poster or something like that. I love the NES. It's my first console. It's what I grew up with. Lots of cool games in here. This, I think, is the best game on the NES. It's The Guardian Legend. It is like The Legend of Zelda mixed with a shoot 'em up. Love this game. Fantastic game. Here's the heavier hitters here in the middle. Bomberman 2, Bucky O'Hare, Chubby Cherub, Kitmaster, Swamp Thing, Mighty Final Fight, Gun Knack, Felix the Cat, Toxic Crusader, Zombie Nation, It's another shoot 'em up where you play as I was going to say decapitated head, but heads aren't decapitated. Bodies are decapitated. The head is disembodied. We'll just say severed. The severed head of a samurai who's trying to save the United States. Very strange game. When I was a kid, we didn't have a lot of money. Times were tough. And a lot of the games I got were used games from Blockbuster. When the games got old, they would sell them for just a few bucks. And my mom bought me a copy of Legendary Wings at Blockbuster. Here it is. Now, times got tougher later and we had to sell all my NES games. So when I started collecting, it was important for me to find Legendary Wings, but it had to be a Blockbuster rental copy. And it took me almost 10 years to track down a Blockbuster rental copy of Legendary Wings. This still has the paper on the back. Every one of these I've ever seen had that paper torn off. But I found this at a yard sale. My PlayStation 2 collection is one of my favorite consoles to collect for. I have a lot of heavy hitters for it, and it's one of the few consoles where I will take a risk on an expensive game that I don't specifically want to get. It's not on my wish list. Chances are it's going to be a unique experience, and chances are if I hate it, it's not going to lose value. Here we have Haunting Ground. Everybody always asks about this. I traded a Vectrex console for this back when Vectrexes were worth like $400, and this game was also worth $400. Now this game's worth like $300, and Vectrex consoles are worth like $500. So, bad deal. I know you guys are huge fans of the GameCube. Everybody was nostalgic about it. They grew up with the GameCube. Well, I did not grow up with the GameCube. The GameCube came out when I was a sophomore in college, and I did not own one, but my ex-girlfriend did. And when we broke up, not only did she break my heart, she stole all my freaking GameCube games.
That hurts.
Every one of them, I had about 10 or so. She still has them as far as I know. So when people think back to when they played the GameCube and they think of like the fun they had as a kid, I think back to that girl. So I'm not as nostalgic about it, but I do love it. And then we have the original Xbox. I'm also not nostalgic for the original Xbox, but when everybody's collecting for the GameCube, when everybody zigs, you've got to zag. So right now I've been beefing up my Xbox collection, and I gotta tell you guys, in the last 6 months, I've doubled this, and I've spent like $150. These games are free. You can grab a stack of them and be like $5 a piece, and they're like, yep, $5 a piece. And here we have my PlayStation Vita stuff and my PSP stuff. Not a huge handheld kind of gamer. I always preferred to play on the consoles, but I'll only point out this one game. This is Breach and Clear. This is the very first Limited Run Games release. Limited Run Games #1. And it's weird that it came out on the Vita. This is an interesting game, but it feels funny that not only did Limited Run Games put that out, it's actually one of the few games they actually produced themselves. And Mighty Rabbit Studios, which is what Limited Run Games spun out of, developed that game. More Super Nintendo stuff. Much like the Wii, it doesn't display well because it's hard to see what's going on, but here's what I'll point out that nobody talks about. It's Run Saber.
Great game.
It's done by Atlas once again. I didn't even plan that, but that's how it worked out. This is a run and gun game similar to Contra, but not quite as hard, but almost as good. So if you like the way Contra plays, but you're struggling to get through it, give this one a shot. A sealed Game Boy Advance up there that I found in a drawer at my wife's parents' house. And then here's my Xbox 360 collection, which is one of my favorite consoles to collect for. It has a lot of unique games on it you wouldn't expect, including a lot of these import shoot-em-ups that are region-free that will play. And I'll show you my favorite one here. And I think this is the best shoot-em-up of all time. But it's Mushihime Sama Futari. I got the 1 credit clear in this game and was one of the top 5 ranked North American players in this for about 3 years. Love the Xbox 360. It's really cheap to collect for, and you can find what you're looking for on that system for just like $10 a game and not have to really pony up the money for it. And here we have my PlayStation 4 collection.
So beautiful.
It's my biggest collection by far. It's about 500 games. I have tons of really interesting and weird games on it that nobody ever really talks about. We don't have time to talk about them all here, but I'm going to point out a couple of them that I think are really just spectacular, nobody ever talks about. Donut County.
Great game. I beat that one recently.
Really?
Yeah.
Great game. It reminds me of Katamari, but instead of being like a big ball that gets heavier with gravity, you end up being a hole in the ground, and the more things you absorb into the hole, the bigger the hole gets, until you're like letting entire cities and things fall into the ground. Really fun game, because this is, without a doubt, the best deal you can ever get on any video game.
Great game.
Slay the Spire. I paid $7 for this, and I got about 500 hours of playtime.
So good.
So good. My wife's addicted to it. I was addicted to it. Fantastic game. And this is the very first Castlevania game, called Vampire Killer. This was in development before Castlevania 1, and while this was being developed, they created Castlevania 1, put it out on the Famicom before this came out. So even though it was in development first, it wasn't the first release. But this is one of the first Metroidvanias ever made. It plays almost like Simon's Quest mixed with like a more modern Metroidvania. It's really hard, very cool, and one of the must-haves on the MSX computer. Here's the Dark Souls Day 1 release in the tin box. We have Earthbound, Little Red Riding Hood Zombie Barbecue, which is one of the most expensive and rarest DS games. Then one of my favorite games of all time is Final Fantasy Tactics. This is the Japanese version of it. I liked the cover art of it. Fantastic game if you haven't played it. I picked this up in Japan. It was 100 yen, which is like $1. My favorite game on the Genesis is probably Sunset Riders. Really cool game, done by Konami. Feels like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Hyperstone Heist if it was like cowboys, right? And you're shooting. So really cool. I mentioned the Guardian Legend earlier, which is my favorite game on the NES. It's actually the sequel to this game, Gartic, which is really cool. It came out in 1986. It's done by Compile, the people that did Aleste. They also did Blazing Lasers. Very interesting primitive shoot 'em up. Still a lot of fun. Really, really hard to find. It took me about 7 or 8 years to track that one down. This is where I stream and edit all my gameplay footage and all my videos and stuff. But over here, we have my probably favorite game of all time, Castlevania Symphony of the Night on the PlayStation 1. And here it is on the Sega Saturn as well. And then this is the soundtrack that came out in Japan. Love this game. I've never gotten tired of it. I always have a thrilling time every time I play it. Just love it to death. I think that's it. That's the end of the game room. We made it all the way to this wall, huh?
We made it.
We made it. It's a long one, guys. Sorry. I have 3,283 games down here and about 83 systems. It's a lot. I've been collecting like 16 years. So it adds up over time.